Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. Hope you're staying safe and well, even if the weather here is a little bit grotty. It doesn't stop us talking about Tottenham Hotspur. I thought I'd do a little video because we had a strange kind of, I suppose you could say coincidence. I think it was a coincidence of having both Mauricio Pochettino and Jose Mourinho doing very decent, actually really good interviews, both of them, around half an hour each. I've watched the full interviews of both as well over the past 24 hours. And yeah, I think there's plenty to kind of tuck into there and have a little chat about. First thing I want to say, and this may be a society thing, I'm going to sound very much like an old man here, but I think what maybe it doesn't surprise me, but obviously I just saw when I was kind of talking about various things on social media, the extremes that people have to have an opinion of. It is kind of thing where you're not allowed to still like Mauricio Pochettino because it means you don't like Jose Mourinho. It's a very kind of odd mentality. You can appreciate one and appreciate the other. It's like it's kind of like having a family member, isn't it? And not liking one and not liking the other. You know, it doesn't have to be the case. You don't have to choose between both of them. One is currently the manager of Tottenham Hotspur, and one used to be. You know, there's very many Tottenham Hotspur managers that kind of will look back fondly on. You know, the likes of Martin Jol, obviously, Glenn Hoddle, maybe perhaps more so as a player, but certainly as a real Tottenham legend in all. There's various managers that just because they were part of the past doesn't mean you have to, right, that's it, door closed. It's a really kind of, I don't know if it's a modern day philosophy or something that's always been there, and I'm only kind of noticing it now with the world of social media, but I just find it really odd. I kind of appreciate both managers, I think, for very different things. Obviously, if I'm going to boil it down to a very, kind of suppose, human, personal level, obviously spent, when did I start? Started covering Spurs in the summer of 2016. So I spent, 3.5 years kind of covering and talking to and dealing with Mauricio Pochettino. Absolutely lovely guy, you know. When he's kind of cameras switch off and you get to sit down and have a chat with him, very fortunate, you know, in places like Shanghai during the pre-season tour only last summer. Got to kind of just sit and have a beer with him essentially, which was very pleasant. He's a very, very nice guy, and you know, you obviously build a bit of a bond over these years. But on the other side, Jose Mourinho's only been here since November. Get on very well with him as well. So there's no, perhaps that colours it slightly differently for me, that I don't feel that I have to, you know, hate one, love the other, as it were. I can just appreciate both. I don't know if that's just a personal circumstance, and don't get me wrong, both have set me up massively. For anyone that remembers it, I remember Poch set me up over Carl Walker-Peters. I think it was after a friendly against Juventus. He told me that Carl Walker-Peters wasn't ready to start against Newcastle in the opening day in the Premier League season, 6 days later or so. And in that team sheet at St James's Park was Carl Walker-Peters, and we had a bit of a laugh of it afterwards. He essentially used me because he wanted to kind of not put the pressure on KWP, and that's fine. And there's obviously been moments over the years when he can be a bit snippy. He's quite an emotional guy. And I think the same with Mourinho. You know, Mourinho set me up over, Jeffet Tanganga's contract, which we all believed came to an end this summer. But the club actually had an option to add another year on, but we weren't aware of that at the time. And so he kind of set me up in a press conference and said wrong very loudly to me, which is fine. It's all part of the job. So in terms of that, I was kind of waffling on a bit of a side direction. But what I'm trying to say is, I don't think you can just have any kind of an agenda against a certain manager or anything like that. I just think we can appreciate both interviews for what they were. They were really, really good. I should flag them up just in case you haven't seen them. So Pochettino spoke to BT Sport, I think it was Jake Humphries and Jermaine Genius, about the Ajax game, because they were showing it last night. So he spoke to them, and I think it's on their YouTube channel, has got the full interview with him, and it's really, really good. I'll kind of come on to that. And Mourinho was with Sky Sports reporter Gary Cottrell, and they chatted inside the stadium, and we'll come on to that. And that was really good. Probably slightly shorter, maybe about 20 minutes in all when you take out the little inserts and things that are in there. But both really, really good interviews, and I thought both managers spoke really, really well. So the key thing with the Pochettino interview, if you haven't seen the kind of snippets and headlines so far, he very clearly said 3 times that he wants to come back to Tottenham Hotspur. Unfinished business. It reminded me of, because I don't know if you've noticed, especially UK viewers, that the Rocky movies have been on. They've been cycling through them most nights. I think they've kind of cycled through them again, literally the next week as well. So we were watching Rocky Balboa the other night, and in that one, which is number 6, there's a point when he says to his son, he says to Paulie, his brother-in-law, I just got something downstairs that I need to get out of me, something in my stomach, something as in getting back to fighting. And I think that's always going to be the case with Pochettino. He's always going to have that something in his stomach about Tottenham, unfinished business, kind of a point to prove. And this came out really clearly in this interview, just the kind of emotion for the club, the love for the club. And, I also saw there's the other side when the video came out of people saying, what has he done? What did he ever do? What did he win? And anyone that's read my stuff on Pochettino knows that's just not my viewpoint whatsoever. If you think that the Tottenham Hotspur that came into that Champions League final on June the 1st was the same Tottenham Hotspur that Pochettino inherited back in May 2014, come on, honestly. It is an absolutely transformed club and squad. This was a team that, Redknapp had managed to get a couple of top 4 finishes. Obviously, only one actually meant they qualified. So they played once in the Champions League. Pochettino turned Spurs into a team that finished every season in top 4, including second place finishes, third place finishes. You expected Tottenham next season to be in the top 4. All the pundits did. They became a very, very different club. Of course he didn't take them on to more. Of course he didn't. And I thought it was a really interesting analogy in the interview with him. If you saw, he spoke about Sir Alex Ferguson and how he'd spoken to him about how with Man United he didn't win the league title until the 7th year. And he spoke about the Netflix documentaries at The Last Dance, which is on my watch list, about Michael Jordan, Chicago Bulls, and how Michael Jordan, I think it was, only won the title of the Bulls in the 7th season. I think it was. Don't hold me to that. It was something along those. That's what Pochettino was talking about. I haven't seen it yet. So I think the kind of the element is that he was putting the building blocks in there. We know, and he said it himself, circumstances changed. We know the last 3-4 months, you could argue longer, certainly in the Premier League, were messy. And I don't mean Lionel. They were properly. Everything became out of sync, and there was Pochettino will be partly to blame for that as well. I think mistakes were made, and I think he lost some of his support with the comments about potentially leaving the club if they won the Champions League, which I will always maintain as someone in that room when that happened. I will always feel that answer to that question was just a bit of a snarky kind of I'm a little bit pissed off kind of answer. And I think it was one of those he said in the heat of the moment without properly having coming in and thought, I'm going to say this. And I just think he was a little bit, some of the questions before had maybe slightly riled him. And then he came in with this kind of a bit arsey answer. And I think it was one that unfortunately he then had to roll with because it became a question in the next couple of press conferences because obviously it was going to be that Champions League final was going to happen and what he was saying. And then he's this kind of guy that also, he doesn't like to look, as all managers, they don't want to look wrong. They don't want to look as if they've said something a little bit daft. And I do feel that was one, if you ask him, maybe even now, if someone asked him, I think he would probably regret saying that. I get what he was trying to say, the comment with all the circumstances, with not having any transfers that season, that could be the peak of his time at Tottenham Hotspur. So what else could he do? But it was just absolutely wrapped up in a package of poop that just really didn't come across very well. And I think he lost, a section of the support with that. And I think those same fans will probably always hold that against him because you never want to hear any player or manager or anyone saying they want to leave the club or they would leave the club in certain circumstances. And obviously we've seen even Harry Kane has been saying stuff about that in the future. So, yeah, I do kind of feel that for him, though, there's an emotional attachment. I think even Daniel Levy said that the door was open for him to return in the future. Do I think he'd return under Levy is another thing. I think with them, their relationship was always very split between the personal and the business one, and that was always made very clear. I think potentially, if Levy and Enoch were still in charge, I think he maybe would come back, but it would be on the provisos of what he was getting, the circumstances, very much that sort of thing. But no, it was a really interesting interview, and I think, as with Pochettino, I think the difference you'll always find with Mourinho and Pochettino is Pochettino is very emotional. Whether it's the kind of South American aspect, the Latin American thing of the emotion being at the fore, but you just always feel that. Whereas Mourinho, you feel everything's very carefully thought out and constructed. And even in the interview that you did last night, Pochettino is wearing the same black shirt that he wore against Ajax. Just because I can't think because of he actually used it in a superstitious way. He said that's one of his regrets actually, is that he didn't wear that same shirt in the final. He changed it. And he said, obviously it brought such a wonderful kind of, or was part of a wonderful moment. And I think kind of going back to what I was saying about the whole winning mentality, I think there's a difference between a winning mentality and a title winning mentality. And kind of bear with me on this. I think what Pochettino did with Spurs, he developed a very much a different kind of mentality in terms of we're never beaten kind of mentality. Of course they were. But I think if you look, the Ajax game obviously is a perfect example, but there was many more times he made them into a team that scored so many late goals. There was this never say die spirit, and I think the Spurs just hadn't had that. You look back at the previous teams that crumbled in a lot of kind of matches when they found themselves starting to go behind, and I think Ajax was probably the culmination, the last real example of that Pochettino mindset. So I think you can have a winning mentality without a title-winning mentality. And I think that was the next step for Pochettino. I think he then needed to half bring in that mentality, but also half bring in players who had that mentality that could also spread that among the group. Whereas we know Tottenham really isn't that kind of club. You look at his final signings and they were all under the age of 23. It's not that kind of club. But I do feel that was something that he will probably have to go and learn elsewhere. That next step, how do you take players who have been used to kind of, let's be honest, near mediocrity. Obviously from Martin Jol onwards, they started to become a top 6 team. But I think Pochettino established them as that, you could argue, probably almost always fighting for the Premier League title. Certainly those 2 years they came close. And I think for him, it was just that next building block. And it was, from my non-league days, there was one manager called Rod Stringer, who's now, I think he's left. He was the manager of Chelmsford City. He was, in those days, the manager of Bishop Stortford Football Club in Hertfordshire. And we're talking Conference South kind of level. And he always had this saying, which was so incredibly cliched, but was right. And he always said, near every game when I was interviewing him, football is about what happens at both ends. It's the moments. And that's pretty much sums up Pochettino's kind of era. It was like, it was so close. But if you look at just certain moments where the right decision wasn't made, right, whether it be by him or a player, and you look at Spurs, who were second that season to Chelsea, third to Leicester, when really they pushed them kind of much closer than that suggestion, just fell apart. The Champions League final, when what they have, I think it was the record amount of shots and goal in a Champions League final, but pretty much all of them were a bit rubbish. It's all about those moments, and I think for Pochettino, he just needs that last little kind of kick over the line to then, I think, will snowball into a really, really good managerial career that won't just be seen as the brilliant coach or the great manager that he is. It will be seen as a title trophy winner type. And I really hope that comes from him. Obviously, we must stress as well, as I did see some people going the other way, like, oh, let's get him back now, let's kick out Mourinho, let's bring him back. It's like, that's not kind of the essence of what this interview was about. He spoke about, in 5-10 years' time, that's what he'd love to do, is come back to Spurs and win a title or a trophy. I think the other thing we put in, I think he calls trophies titles. So the Champions League for him is a title rather than a trophy. And I think that will always bug him until he kind of can get it out of his system. But we're not talking about now. He's not. He's talking about the long-term future. And, he's going to go away. We might see possibly Newcastle, obviously, has been mooted with the money that he'd have there. He spoke about going to clubs where the they're expected to win titles every single season. And then he said, obviously, that's a very different kind of project, which he may walk into as well. I think, obviously, he's just waiting for next season, and let's kind of see what that brings. But, yeah, there's just no need for these extremes. And I just kind of looked at it. I retweeted his initial, I think I did a snippet of the interview, and I just looked at the replies, and I just couldn't believe it. And you've got this strange other kind of fan, which, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, it's probably not something that I'd do, but there are Mourinho fans, which I find really interesting. I suppose there's probably similar ones for maybe big name players like Ronaldo, and probably with Messi it's not the same because he's been at one club, but who will follow him everywhere, and they will have Mourinho as their profile picture, and whatever club Mourinho's at, that is their club they're keeping an eye on, and they swarm when people say about Pochettino, and I just kind of feel there's no need. There's absolutely no need. And, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that way of football fandom. If that's your thing, that's your thing. I mean, probably if Pochettino does go to Newcastle, of course, I'll probably have like one eye on what he does. A bit like when Martin Jol went to Ajax and Hamburg and places like that. Kind of Hamburg first, wasn't it? Then Ajax, and then obviously Fulham. You kind of keep one eye on it because it's someone that's done good things, giving you good memories in the past, and you look at what they do. I probably wouldn't continue to be a fan of that new team, but I just find it really weird the way that everyone attacks each other over the most pointless of things. It's one of those hypothetical kind of debates. Pochettino isn't coming straight back. Mourinho is going to have time to do what he wants, and let's move on to Mourinho, because I think it was a really, really impressive interview. It was a very different interview. It wasn't, this was about, he was kind of kept stressing this was about showing what the club were doing in terms of helping people out during the coronavirus. Pochettino did mention that sort of stuff as well, and he wanted to auction that shirt. I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying that only Mourinho was doing that. But, it was very much a look at what the stadium's doing, with giving over a portion of it to the what's it called, North Middlesex Hospital for the maternity ward, and the food deliveries which he's helping out with, taking produce that's grown at the training ground, taking it to the stadium so it can go out to people who need it. He's doing good things, and the club are doing really great things, and that was important to say that. But I just thought the core of what he actually then got into in the football stuff was really interesting. It's what I really like about the way Mourinho speaks is there was always maybe a feeling that he always wants to look back to the past. We know what he's done, 25 trophies in 20 years, phenomenal. He's probably is the most decorated manager, isn't he, in European football. He's done phenomenal things, but I think it's so important that he is aware, and he seems to be, that you're not now judged on that. You're judged on the here, now, and the future, and what you do. And I think to come out and say they obviously tried to get him down the line of, today is the anniversary of his first Premier League title win with Chelsea. It was 15 years ago, wasn't it? But he was very much saying, well, yes, I've been able to watch matches of previous, highlights of previous games that I hadn't seen before during this lockdown. But for me, I don't want to talk about that third title or the second title or the first title. I want to talk about the fourth Premier League title. I want to talk about what I'm going to do. And he was asked at Tottenham, he said yes. And I think that's great to hear. I'm very much in the camp. I think some people are slightly quick to judge Mourinho. I think he comes with that weight of expectation. I think the football has been pretty rubbish, but I would say the football was pretty rubbish in the first half of the season before his arrival as well. I think it's a team that have real confidence issues. I think it's a team that are very much have lost some big experienced names, and I think it's a team that we know had those injuries. So I personally am not going to really judge it until we see what next season brings. I think this lockdown pre-season, as it were, if it happens, is going to be a really important one for Tottenham. I say lockdown pre-season after lockdown, I think is going to be really important to Mourinho building that kind of team ethic that he does. And I don't think there's any reason to doubt that this would be the only club since his early years in management that he's not going to win a trophy at. And that's what the fans wanted. That was the big complaint about Pochettino, was that it would never hit the next step. And I think Mourinho can bring that. What else? I mean, the other interesting thing I think he spoke about, we mentioned those injuries. He spoke about Harry Kane, Steven Bergwijn, Moussa Sissoko, Son Heung-min, that all of these players are now fit. He said, well, I think he was quite careful the way he said it. He said they no longer have those injuries. So that's obviously a major boost. He said, but for now, the key thing is kind of training themselves and getting themselves back into that football mindset, because obviously what they've been getting them doing mostly is fitness work, it's running, but it's not so much ball work, because obviously you're limited in space and what you can do. And even now they open the training ground on Tuesday for the players to come in, but that's to have a pitch each. It's very, very carefully kind of controlled. You have to drive in by yourself. You come in, you use one pitch, you don't train, you come in ready to go, you go straight to your pitch, and then they can work with it. I presume the likes of Mourinho and all that can stand by the side of the pitch and tell them things to do, but it very much sounds like it's running at this moment, and we're not talking about real football drills, but I wouldn't be surprised if it evolves into that. I don't know whether there's a question over equipment and making sure that equipment is, I suppose, sanitised or antibacterial, whatever you want to call it. But I think that will be important for those injured players. There is obviously a caveat that comes with that, because we know that Son Heung-min is out doing his military training with the Marine Corps out in South Korea. That's got another week left. And then when he does return next month, he's then obviously going to have to do the 14 days self-isolation after that with the government procedure. And the same will be the case with Steven Bergwijn, who's obviously gone back to the Netherlands to become a dad for the first time. When he comes back with his family, that will be exactly the same. They'll have to spend 14 days. So for them, two players obviously that have been out injured, it's going to be a different kind of return. With Son, you'd imagine he'll be the fittest one back there. Some of the stuff I'm reading that they're going to have to do, he's going to be worked hard in that 3 weeks. So for him, he kind of will have had his own pre-season. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see kind of what he does with those. And I think for Mourinho, the key thing is time. It's very much going back to early Mourinho. We're talking Porto days in terms of the way he's not going to have a lot of money. I'm sorry, but anyone that believes, and obviously I have to write things about transfers as well and things like that, but if anyone has got it into their head that they believe that Spurs or 99% of the clubs out there are going to be signing a big transfer, big signing players, it's not going to happen. It's not. We might get back to that next summer, perhaps. Maybe even in January if the funds start kind of rolling in. But this summer, for two reasons really, finances are absolutely stuffed. And secondly, just the look of it all. Especially, you look at a team, even Spurs, the PR bashing they got because of the decisions they made, in the last month or so before they did the U-turn. And then you look, how are they going to do that and then announce a 60, 70 million pound signing? It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And like I say, the money's not going to be there. All of that money that does come in is then going to have to be kind of rerouted into areas of the club that they've had to cut during this crisis, kind of essential running things as well. And I think funds are going to have to try and be generated, but likewise there's that knock-on effect of other clubs not being able to afford players. Values are going to have to come down. Swap deals, free transfers, things like that are going to really become prevalent. I just wouldn't get your hopes up. And the reason I'm kind of going into that is I think for Mourinho, obviously we know he's a guy that's had a fair bit of transfer backing at clubs he's been at. Whereas this one, I think he's going to be more creative and he's going to have to work on the group itself that he's got and get that, like we said, a title-winning mentality out of them. And I think that's going to take him back to his Porto days. It's going to be really interesting to see how he works with that, whether he becomes frustrated or whether he can still achieve. I think the fact that he's still coming out and saying things about the title, it'd be interesting to see if anyone can ask him whether he still believes that Spurs will challenge for the title this next season. If he does, then he's decided that he's got enough and he can kind of just supplement with a couple of maybe cheaper, experienced players that have been used to his methods. But yeah, I think people just need to be, this is probably I don't want to sound like a guy dishing out some kind of rubbish lesson to the world or anything, because that's certainly not what I'm trying to do, but I just think it just needs to be a little bit more tolerance, doesn't there? A little bit more patience. either way, with people that kind of aren't at the club, with the people that are at the club. I know with Mourinho, he's done things that haven't impressed people in the past. I know he will have done things in his Spurs time already that won't have impressed people. But I think people need time to lay their own foundations. And I think Pochettino will say the same. He will say that 5 years wasn't even enough. Like he said, we was talking about the 7th season. With Mourinho, he probably works on a shorter time scale because of what he's been used to. But I still don't think we can judge him from November, what we're looking at, 5-6 months. I think, and I hope there's a lot more to come. I think there is. I don't think it's the time to be, I think with everything that's going on in the world, I think perhaps we kind of instantly look to the worst case scenario, and I think certainly with football, let's not forget it's a game at the end of the day for us, for the fans, and obviously for the people that don't have a financial interest in it. It's just, I think we just have to go with it and just say. But I do think with Spurs, I think it's a let's see what happens thing rather than let's all rush to judge now. And I kind of touched on it there. That was why I kind of stopped myself because I was going to go down that line. But what actually happens next with the Premier League, we'll know more tomorrow. There's obviously a meeting between the clubs via Zoom or whatever kind of video conferencing ways they do it. We'll find out a little bit more. Whether we'll get any concrete things, I don't know. But certainly discussions have been going on. We know that. I think the issue is, and I did a little poll the other day and I felt a little bit bad because I removed voiding as an option. And the reason I did that was not because I don't believe in voiding or anything like that, or I knew most people would go for that. It was more, I wanted to separate fandom from it, because as a Spurs fan, naturally voiding is the perfect scenario. Because, and I have to make this clear, because I think sometimes people are getting mixed up with the definition of voiding and cancelling. So voiding a season means it never happened. Everything is then decided for the next season from the previous season before. So obviously that benefits Spurs, because Spurs finished 4th, they'd be in the Champions League for next year. That's what voiding is. Cancelling is a different thing, and that's what we're seeing in some other leagues. Not all of them. I think Eredivisie in the Netherlands, they have voided, so nothing actually applied. Whereas the other options are cancelling. And when you cancel, then you have other choices. Do you decide to go with it based on how it finished? Obviously unfair in terms of games not played, people that had games in hand. Do you make up that difference with points per game? So do you do a table based on points per game? The other UEFA option was sporting merit, which includes UEFA coefficients. There's various things. It's a little bit like anyone that's kids are doing their GCSEs and stuff, or A-levels. Those will be decided for this current academic year based on a number of different things, not just previous exam results, things like that. It'll be everything taken into account. And that's kind of what sporting merit is. So this is the reason it's absolute minefield in terms of, and I understand wholeheartedly people saying, oh, it's not the most important thing now. Who cares? Don't get them out. I get that side of it completely. The other side of it, obviously, is that like any business that you see out in the high street, they are struggling and they want to know when they can get back to work, as it were. Financially, they absolutely have had all of their income turned off like other businesses. You look at France, France have come out with this decision, which is obviously based on the government, but now beIN Sports and Canal Plus have both come out and I believe has said only this afternoon, right, well, we're not paying £243 million euros worth of money that was meant to go for TV rights for the remainder of the season. This is the issue, and that's the French league. When you're talking about the Premier League, you're talking about over £1 billion. And I know it's vulgar to talk about money when we're talking about people dying. It's a horrible way to do it, but it's also anyone that's sitting at home wondering when they can get back to work, whose work has been kind of paused or stopped, or they've been furloughed, and you're wondering when you can kind of get back to earning money, and that's kind of what football is right now. Obviously, we're talking about bigger sums involved, but we're also talking about bigger outgoings. And, I'm wholeheartedly agree. If there was a great solution to just say, let's end that season, and everyone was happy with it, and you wouldn't get legal challenges, which I think pretty much would come with any of the potential scenarios, And obviously that TV money that they could rightly just withhold because they didn't fulfill the contract. I think it becomes a real minefield of stuff. There's emotion, there's money, there's legal issues. So much. There is so much to kind of all take on board, and I think probably is no right answer. And then obviously you're getting into some of the ridiculous things that would have to be in place to play the things like, I think they're going to disinfect all of the equipment they use. Do players wear masks? They're going to wear masks apparently while they train, or they're going to wear masks in matches. What happens if you slide tackle a player and that player falls on you, their sweat goes on you, blood, whatever. There's so many possible ways of contamination. And, then you go into, if a player is found positive for the coronavirus, do you then isolate the rest of that team? There's talk that you then won't, because they'll be testing every 2 days. But then the flip side of that is, twice. Is it twice? It's either twice a week or twice a day. But then the flip side of that is, okay, so say you're missing a key player for a match. Is that considered that the integrity of the league has gone, or is it considered just to be like a normal injury? The whole aspect of playing in neutral venues, that's clearly is affecting the integrity of the competition. There's also talk of hubs where teams will have to live for a month. I think for Spurs, that could benefit Mourinho. I think Mourinho working that atmosphere, forging that them and us scenario could probably work. But then you're missing out on, say, the North London derby, 60,000 Spurs fans against a couple of thousand Arsenal fans. I think there's such a mess to it. This is so unprecedented. And it's just going to come to a scenario, I think, where people are just going to have to decide either way. And I think whatever way is going to be picked, someone's going to be really unhappy with. But yeah, sorry, I went off on a little bit of a tangent with that one. But yeah, we'll find out more tomorrow. And obviously we are thinking of not next month. We're thinking of June when football would return. So it's obviously also important not to look at it as playing football next week. We are talking about 6 weeks' time when you'd think the majority of businesses will be back, hopefully, in operation, obviously with social distancing involved, and that's clearly is the issue with football. There won't be social distancing. Then there's a case of testing, although I think a lot of people are getting quite upset with the testing thing, but there's also an element that the Premier League would be paying for that, and it would come from supplies that aren't required by the government, as in a separate list. There's still probably other ways to kind of find fault with that as well. But yeah, I'm not going to go on that for ages because it's a subject that we're probably going to go on and on and on about in the media and just chatting amongst ourselves for a long, long time. But in terms of Tottenham, as I said, they're back in individual training, little bits and pieces. If these proposed plans that we keep hearing about go ahead, then you're looking at, I think it was mid-May they would come back, so next month, as in terms of being able to do team training. But let's see what happens. And like I say, go and look up those Pochettino and Mourinho interviews. They're both really, really good. Two very different men, two very different managers, but saying some really interesting things. And there's no reason to choose either or. It is what it is. Whoever's the manager now is the manager now. And whoever was the manager then did what they did. Reply with your comments underneath. Get your questions in. I'll probably, hopefully at the weekend, try and do a Q&A. So ask as many questions as you like. Obviously be aware with transfer ones, you know what my answer is probably going to be based on what's come before. But please do ask away anyway. There may be other facets to it that I can talk about, and certainly various other things about whatever I've just spoken about. Get your questions in and I'll do my best. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy, and I shall catch you later. Football will return, life will return to normal. It's just a case of when. So I'll talk to you later. Bye.